Sister banned me from her wedding because I'd bring bad luck, but her new husband found out and called off the wedding. Now they're separated, and she's blaming me. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Mitchell, 26, and somehow I've become the reason my sister Emily's marriage fell apart. Before I dive into this mess, let me be upfront about something. I'm the product of my dad's affair. Yeah, it's complicated, and my stepmom Diana, who's this successful 55-year-old real estate agent, never lets me forget it. She has this way of saying things like, "You're a constant reminder of your father's mistakes," with the same professional smile she probably uses to sell million-dollar properties in Boston. I work as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital, and I love my job. It's fulfilling, meaningful work. Everything my stepmom thinks I don't deserve. Growing up in their fancy suburban house was rough. Diana always made sure I knew I was different, but working with sick kids has taught me that there are way more important things in life than someone's approval. I remember this one summer when I was around 8 or 9. Emily and I wanted to go to the country club pool with some friends. When I asked Diana if I could come along, she looked up from her real estate listings and said, "Why don't you just stay home and give everyone a break?" With that same cold politeness she uses with difficult clients. Emily, already dressed in her designer swimsuit, just smirked. They left without me, and I spent the whole day in my room trying to convince myself that I didn't care. That pretty much sums up my childhood. Diana had this talent for making me feel like an unwanted house listing she couldn't sell. During holidays, she'd get Emily these elaborate, thoughtful gifts: the latest iPhone, designer handbags from Gucci or Prada, you name it. Me? I get something that looked like it came from a clearance rack at Target. One Christmas, Emily got a MacBook Pro because she needed it for her marketing degree, and I got a scarf. They didn't even spell Sarah right on the gift tag. I still remember standing there in their pristine living room, holding that misnamed scarf, while Emily unboxed her laptop, the Christmas tree lights reflecting off the expensive ornaments Diana insisted on having. Growing up, Emily, being 5 years older and already climbing the corporate ladder in marketing, always found ways to make me feel small. She used her age and success like weapons. She'd constantly criticize everything about me: my nurse's scrubs, my sensible shoes, my modest apartment in Brighton, or literally anything else she could think of. I still remember this one time during my nursing school days, when I bought these purple Crocs for my hospital rotations. I thought they were perfect for those long shifts. Emily saw them when she stopped by my apartment, probably just to show off her new BMW, and said, "Those make you look like you raid the pediatric wards lost and found. But I guess that fits your career choice." I tried to laugh it off, but after that, I couldn't wear them without hearing her voice in my head. Emily also had this habit of spreading rumors about me at family gatherings and her high society events. She'd tell her marketing exec friends that I was adopted, which technically you could say was half true, given the circumstances. That rumor spread through Boston's upper-class social circles faster than a flu in my pediatric ward. When I confronted her about it at one of Diana's fancy dinner parties, she just swirled her champagne and said, "Well, you kind of are, right? I mean, your mom's not exactly in the picture." She said this right in front of some of her colleagues from her marketing firm, like it was just casual dinner conversation. I tried so hard to connect with her, you know? I thought if I could somehow be more like her, more successful by her standards, maybe she'd accept me as her sister. I'd reach out, asking if she wanted to grab coffee between my hospital shifts, or maybe help me understand some basic investment stuff, since she was doing so well in her corporate job. But she always had some excuse. "I have a crucial meeting with clients," or "Why don't you ask your real mom for help?" Oh, wait. She'd say it with this little laugh, like it was just a joke, but we both knew it wasn't. Eventually, I stopped trying. I focused on my nursing career instead, throwing myself into my work at the Children's Hospital. At least there, I knew I was making a real difference in people's lives, even if my own family couldn't see my worth. College years. I went to nursing school on scholarships and student loans, gradually distancing myself from all of them. Being away from their Beacon Hill mansion was like finally being able to breathe after a long shift with a tight N95 mask. But even now, when I go back for holidays, which I try to limit to absolute necessities, the tension is so thick you could cut it with a surgical scalpel. Diana makes these passive-aggressive comments about how I never visit their humble home, while Emily loves to throw in jabs like, some people just can't handle family or success. This usually happens while she's showing off her latest promotion or luxury purchase. Hospital incident. The worst of it all happened when my dad had a health scare a couple of years ago. I was in the middle of my night shift at the pediatric ward when I got the call that he'd been rushed to the cardiac unit. Even though it wasn't my department, I knew exactly how serious it could be. The advantages of being a nurse, I guess. Despite just finishing a 12-hour shift, I immediately went to his room. When I arrived, still in my scrubs, Diana and Emily acted like I was just another nurse who'd wandered into the wrong room. Diana, wearing her designer suit like she'd just come from showing a luxury property, muttered something about how unauthorized personnel shouldn't be there. Emily, who'd apparently taken time off from her precious marketing job, flat out told me to leave, saying, "Why don't you just go back to your little nurse station? We've got this covered." Even in that serious moment, with our dad hooked up to cardiac monitors, they couldn't let go of their pettiness. And Dad? Michael Mitchell, the high-powered IT executive, he just lay there in his hospital bed, pretending to be too focused on his heart monitor to notice the tension. Every time I'd try to explain his condition in medical terms, or suggest treatment options based on my nursing experience, he'd just say something like, "Let's just try to get along, sweetie. The doctors know what they're doing." Like, "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Dad." Apparently, my medical knowledge wasn't worth as much as Emily's marketing expertise. Present day. After that incident, I moved to a small apartment in Brighton, away from their Beacon Hill world. I focused on my nursing career, building a life that didn't revolve around their approval. I'd still go back for major holidays, more out of obligation than desire, but otherwise, I kept my distance. It was easier that way, focusing on my patients and the real differences I could make in their lives. Last year, Emily brought her fans, James Wilson, to one of these obligatory holiday gatherings. He was this 31-year-old human rights lawyer, and honestly, I had no idea what to expect. I figured he'd be just like the rest of their social circle, polite but distant, probably judging my career choice and modest lifestyle. But to my complete surprise, James and I actually hit it off. He was normal, genuinely interested in my work at the Children's Hospital, asking thoughtful questions about patient care and healthcare accessibility. He didn't treat me like I was this weird outsider, or worse, Dad's big mistake. We talked about everything: healthcare reform, social justice, even travel, which, given the whole Europe on Diana's dime thing, was usually a sore topic. But with James, it was just easy. It felt like, for once, someone in my sister's world saw me as a person, not just some inconvenient reminder of family history. Holiday gathering. The holiday visit itself was pretty much what you'd expect. Diana was her usual cold self, greeting me with, "Oh, so you finally decided to show up," while adjusting her Cartier bracelet, like I'd just kept a luxury property viewing waiting. Emily was being Emily, mostly ignoring me, but keeping the obvious digs to a minimum, probably because James was there. She was definitely on her best behavior, showcasing that perfect image she'd crafted for her corporate life. Then, completely out of nowhere, Emily pulled me aside in Diana's expensively decorated hallway and asked if I'd be one of her bridesmaids. I nearly dropped the cheap wine glass I'd been nursing all evening. I mean, we barely spoke, except when she needed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. And now she wanted me in her wedding? My first instinct was to say no. The thought of standing up there in some overpriced bridesmaid dress, pretending we were one big happy family for her marketing firm colleagues and Diana's real estate connections, made me want to pick up an extra hospital shift instead. But something, maybe years of trying to keep the peace, or maybe the naive hope that things could change, made me say yes. I thought, just maybe, this could be our chance to finally build a real relationship. After all, I'd seen enough sick kids reunite with their siblings in my ward to know that sometimes miracles do happen. Wedding preparations. But I should have known better. Being Emily's bridesmaid was like being an unpaid intern at her marketing firm. All the work, none of the credit. There was this bridesmaid group chat full of her corporate friends and socialite connections. And while I was technically in it, I might as well have been invisible. They'd be discussing dress fittings at boutiques I couldn't afford to window shop at, and planning a bachelorette party at some exclusive Hamptons retreat. When I asked Emily about attending the dress fittings between my hospital shifts, she glanced at her Rolex and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. I've got it handled." Translation: your presence might make the boutique staff uncomfortable. I quickly realized that Emily asking me to be a bridesmaid wasn't about sisterly bonding. It was just another way to remind me of my place in their world. While I was doing all the grunt work, like managing the gift registry for their absurdly expensive items and sending out invitations to their elite guest list, I wasn't even invited to the bachelorette party. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I probably couldn't get time off from the pediatric ward anyway, but it still stung. The wedding drama. But here's the real kicker. After all the work I put in, scheduling around my night shifts, using my lunch breaks to stuff envelopes, even helping pick out their ridiculously expensive wedding favors, Emily dropped the bomb. She called me while I was charting between patient rounds and told me I couldn't come to the wedding. Her reason? She actually said having someone like me, a product of an affair, would bring bad luck to her marriage. Right there, in the middle of the nurses' station, with my colleagues working around me, I felt like someone had just flatlined my heart. I lost it. All those years of keeping my composure, of maintaining professional calm like I do with difficult patients' families, just evaporated. I went off on her, my voice shaking with years of pent-up anger. A few choice words might have slipped out, words I definitely wouldn't use around my pediatric patients. She deserved it, honestly. I've dealt with a lot of tough situations in the pediatric ward, but this was a whole new level of cruel. My own sister was banning me from her wedding because of something I had absolutely no control over, treating me like I was some kind of bad omen in her perfect marketing executive life. And Emily? She handled it like she was dismissing a junior employee. All cool and collected, like she was in some corporate board meeting, making me feel like I was the unprofessional one for having an emotional reaction. No apology, no recognition of how hurtful she was being. Just cold, calculated rejection. The kind she probably uses when cutting underperforming accounts from her marketing portfolio. Post-confrontation. After that, I was done. Completely done. I did what any good nurse would do with a toxic situation. I cut it off. It wasn't even about the wedding anymore. It was about the fact that my sister, who'd grown up in the same house as me, albeit with very different treatment, saw me as some kind of stain on her perfect corporate climbing life, and didn't even have the basic human decency to acknowledge my feelings. I was exhausted from trying to fit into a family that treated me like a chronic condition they couldn't cure. Dad, ever the conflict-avoidant IT executive, stayed out of it mostly. I think he felt guilty, but with Diana around, micromanaging everyone's lives like she does her real estate portfolio, he never really stepped up. Diana probably thought my absence would increase the property value of the wedding. Dad didn't stand up for me. But at this point in my life, after years of similar disappointments, I didn't expect him to. He's never really done that. So why would he start now? Wedding day. However, the drama was far from over. On her wedding day, I was working a long shift in the pediatric ward, trying to lose myself in caring for my patients. It was almost therapeutic, focusing on helping sick kids instead of thinking about the elaborate ceremony happening across town. Then, out of nowhere, my phone exploded with notifications. Emily was calling, screaming so loud, I had to step into the break room to handle it. She was hysterical, telling me I'd ruined her life. I was literally standing there in my scrubs, completely confused. I hadn't even left the hospital that day, let alone done anything to ruin her wedding. Before I could even ask what was happening, she launched into a string of accusations that would make some of my more colorful patients' parents blush, saying something about how I always had to make everything about myself. Then she hung up, leaving me standing there in the break room, completely baffled. The video revelation. Minutes later, while I was trying to collect myself before returning to my rounds, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my cousin sending me a video with the message, "You need to see this now." I grabbed my stethoscope, ducked into the empty nurse's lounge, and hit play. It was James' wedding speech. And oh boy, it was not what anyone expected. There was James, standing in what looked like one of Boston's most expensive wedding venues, giving his speech not about love or their future together, but about me. I watched, completely stunned, as this high-powered human rights lawyer used his wedding toast to systematically lay out every instance of how my family had treated me over the years. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He was using his courtroom voice, the one he probably uses when arguing civil rights cases. He talked about the systematic exclusion, the constant emotional abuse, how they'd made me the family scapegoat. He spoke about how a pediatric nurse who dedicated her life to helping children was treated as less than by her own family. The speech wasn't some small side note either. It was like watching a closing argument in a human rights case. He even concluded by saying, "Sarah, if you're watching this, I want you to know that not everyone in this family thinks you're a mistake. You deserve better than this systematic discrimination, and I'm sorry you had to endure it." After the speech, I sat there in the nurse's lounge, still in my scrubs, absolutely floored. James had just done what no one in my family had ever done. He'd stood up for me. While I appreciated his words and the way he'd used his legal expertise to lay out the years of unfair treatment, I could also understand why Emily was having a meltdown. Of course, she'd blame me, even though I was literally helping a 7-year-old through post-op care when all this went down. She was probably mortified that her new husband had just presented a case against family discrimination in front of all their high society guests. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from family members. Half of them were angry messages from Diana's real estate circles and Emily's marketing world, asking, "How could you let James ruin Emily's big society wedding?" As if I had any control over what a human rights lawyer chose to say. The other half were surprisingly supportive messages from relatives I barely knew, saying things like, "I had no idea they treated a healthcare worker like that," or "I'm sorry I never spoke up when I saw how they excluded you." I didn't know how to respond to any of them, so I did what I always do during crisis situations at work. I focused on my patients and let the chaos swirl around me. The aftermath. The funny thing is, James and I hadn't even talked that much about my family situation. Sure, we'd had a few conversations about healthcare inequality and social justice, and he knew things were strained between me, Emily, and Diana, but I never expected him to turn his wedding speech into a public advocacy moment. Part of me felt guilty, like I had somehow inadvertently caused this disruption, but another part felt validated. Finally, someone had called out the toxic behavior in front of all the people who'd been enabling it for years. It was the kind of validation I usually only felt when helping a patient recover against the odds. Father's call. Then my dad called, which was as rare as a full night's sleep during residency. He started the conversation awkwardly, like he was trying to negotiate a failing business deal. After some stilted small talk about my work at the hospital, he finally got to the point. He wanted me to talk to James and tell him he was wrong about everything, that our family dynamics weren't as bad as he'd made them seem. I was shocked. Standing in the hospital corridor, watching nurses and doctors rush past with their usual urgency, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father, who had never stood up for me during all those years of exclusion, was asking me to lie about my experiences. It was like being asked to falsify a patient's chart, completely against my principles. I told him straight up, "No, I'm not doing that." I wasn't going to discredit James for being the one person who'd actually acknowledged the truth. Family pressure. Dad's response was exactly what you'd expect from a corporate executive. He said Emily's marriage and the family's reputation in Boston's social circles were at stake, as if that was supposed to change my mind. Even after everything, his main concern was about maintaining appearances rather than addressing the actual problem. I held my ground, just like I do with difficult patients' families, and told him again, I'm not going to lie to make everyone feel better about how they've treated me. My father didn't like that. He started going on about how this whole situation was blown out of proportion, and that if I just talked to James, everything would go back to normal. I could hear Diana in the background, probably already calculating the social damage to her real estate network. But I stood firm, just like I do when advocating for my pediatric patients. I wasn't about to help them sweep decades of discrimination under their expensive Persian rugs. Ongoing situation. Since that phone call, it's been like managing a ward during flu season. Chaos everywhere. I keep getting texts and calls from Dad, Emily, and various family members, all pressuring me to fix things with James. They seem to think that if I just say something, everything will magically return to normal, and they can go back to pretending nothing was ever wrong. Emily, in particular, has been relentless, sending me these long, dramatic messages worthy of a corporate crisis management team about how I'm destroying her life and how her marriage is going to fail if I don't intervene. Current dilemma. I'm in this weird position now, like when you have to balance multiple critical patients. On one hand, I don't want to see James and Emily's marriage collapse because of this, but on the other hand, I'm not going to deny my lived experiences just to maintain their perfect social facade. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not responsible for fixing their mess. If Emily's marriage is struggling because James called out their behavior, that's something they need to work through themselves. Just like I tell my young patients' families, healing can't begin until you acknowledge there's a problem. At this point, I'm emotionally exhausted, like after a triple shift in the pediatric ICU. I've told them no multiple times, but they just won't stop. I'm seriously considering blocking their numbers for my own peace of mind, but I worry that might make things even worse. It's draining, trying to maintain professional composure at work while dealing with this constant family drama. I just want to focus on my patients and build a life free from their toxic influence, but they're making it really difficult. Update 1. Background clarification. I feel like I need to clear up a few things, since I've been getting a lot of questions from coworkers and fellow nurses who've heard about the situation. First, many asked why I even lived with my stepmom and dad. The truth is, my mom died when I was 4. A car accident that ended with her passing away in the same hospital where I now work. After that, I had no choice but to move in with my dad and Diana. I was just a kid who'd lost her mom, and Diana's house in Beacon Hill became my only option. Let me lay out the whole messy situation. This all started because my dad, the now successful IT executive, had an affair with my mom when they were working at the same tech company. They kept it hidden from Diana for about a year, until one of her real estate colleagues spotted my dad at a women's clinic with my mom. Diana, somehow, chose to forgive him and stay, although forgive might be too strong a word, given how she's treated me since. As a nurse, I've learned to practice empathy, even in difficult situations. I've tried to understand Diana's perspective, how hard it must have been to see me growing up in her house, a daily reminder of her husband's infidelity. But I was just an innocent child. None of this was my fault. Whatever issues she had with my father's choices shouldn't have been taken out on me. Growing up in Diana's house, growing up in that Beacon Hill mansion, I could tell from an early age that Diana saw me as an unwanted addition to her perfect family portfolio. She'd make these cutting remarks like, "Your mother might have been prettier, but at least I'm the one who stayed around to raise you," or, "I wonder how different your life would be if she hadn't died." As a pediatric nurse now, I see so many broken families, but watching children's resilience has taught me that it's not about where you come from. It's about where you're going. The wedding situation. The second thing I want to address is James' speech. A lot of my colleagues have asked why he chose that moment to speak up. The truth is, he didn't know about Emily uninviting me until someone mentioned it during the reception. He had no idea she'd told me not to come because I'd bring bad luck. Apparently, when he found out, it hit a nerve, especially given his work in human rights law. In the heat of the moment, he decided to use his platform to address the discrimination he'd witnessed. I don't think he planned to cause a scene, he just couldn't stand by while this pattern of exclusion continued. About being a bridesmaid. Some of my nurse friends asked why I even agreed to be a bridesmaid, knowing Emily's track record. Honestly, when she asked me between her marketing meetings and my hospital shifts, I was shocked. For a moment, I thought maybe this was her way of finally accepting me into her world. Looking back, it was probably naive of me, like hoping a chronic condition would suddenly cure itself. But at the time, I just wanted to believe that things could get better. So when she asked, I said yes, even though my gut instinct, the same one I rely on during difficult cases, was screaming that it would end badly. Update 2. Coffee shop meeting. About 3 days after the wedding, between my hospital shifts, I got an unexpected call from James. He asked if we could meet, and we agreed on this quiet coffee shop near the hospital, the kind of place where I usually decompress after difficult shifts. When I arrived, still in my scrubs, James looked as exhausted as I feel after a double shift in pediatrics. We started with small talk before he apologized for his wedding speech. I was surprised. In my line of work, we're taught that speaking up against wrongdoing isn't something that needs an apology. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He was the only one who'd ever stood up for me. When I asked why he hadn't just talked to Emily directly, he explained that he had tried after discovering I was uninvited, but she dismissed his concerns completely. He admitted he'd always known Emily could be harsh in her corporate world, but he never imagined she'd treat her own sister this way. That hit me hard. Like when you realize a patient's condition is worse than initially diagnosed. The separation discussion. What are you planning to do now? I asked him, genuinely curious about his next steps. He looked lost, like families do when faced with difficult medical decisions. He confessed he was struggling with the idea of being married to someone who could treat their own sister this way, but he was also grappling with the weight of this decision. Then he asked if I planned to forgive Emily. The question caught me off guard, like an unexpected code blue. I explained that Emily hadn't even attempted to apologize, except for that one angry phone call during my shift. James looked genuinely shocked. He revealed he'd told Emily their marriage depended on her making things right with me. Finding out she hadn't even tried clearly hit him hard. Update 3. 1 month later. It's been a month now, and like a long-term patient's chart, there's been significant development. First, Emily still hasn't apologized. Not surprising to anyone who knows her. The constant pressure from my family has finally stopped, like when a fever finally breaks after a long illness. The biggest update is that Emily and James are officially separated. From what I've heard through James and some cousins, things had been unstable for a while, and this wedding drama just pushed it over the edge. As a nurse, I'm trained to not feel guilty about diagnosing problems, but part of me still feels responsible. However, James has assured me this wasn't just about the wedding or me. It was about who Emily is as a person. Emily's not handling the separation well, which is about as surprising as a kid crying when getting a shot. She's been telling anyone who'll listen that I somehow manipulated James into leaving her. Classic deflection, like when families blame the messenger for bad news. James and I have stayed in touch, checking in occasionally. He's seeing a therapist, which as a healthcare professional, I fully support. He seems to be processing everything in a healthy way. If anything changes, I'll update. But for now, this seems to be the end of this particular family crisis. Like we say in the pediatric ward, sometimes healing means letting go of what hurts you